wonderful. Keep them coming. And in the meantime, I will start introducing myself and my co-host and magic maker for tonight, Radu. And then we will ask our wonderful guests to introduce themselves as well. So for those of you who don't know me, I am Ioana. I am, I think, better known as UX Goodies in the UX industry. I am here on behalf of Mento because Mento is also something that I do and I love very much. It's the UX bootcamp that we founded last year, and it's a project that we built with a team of I think now it's like more than 10 designers. So many people joined in the meantime. We are trying to change the way that people transition to UX design and to improve the world of UX education. And these events are part of that mission. I think that having conversations about inclusive design, for example, is like a pillar of changing the way that and the questions that people have when they transition to UX design and in their first years in the design industry. So this is me, this is Mento. I will now invite Gemma to give a short intro. And hi, Gemma. Thanks for accepting this invitation.
Hello. I do have pretty bad internet, so there may be a little delay, but hopefully we can still get through this. So if you don't know, product designer who is based in Cardiff, the UK, Wales. Okay. So right now I currently work for a financial company based in South Wales, and I run an Instagram account called Hellier Studio. And the reason why I set up that account was because I noticed that there was a gap in the whole conversation of accessibility and inclusive design. So the whole point of my Instagram page was to bring awareness to that, because there's a huge misconception accessibility and inclusive design is difficult, when actually that's completely not true. It's about involving the process at the very beginning of everything that you do. So that's me.
Thank you so much. I hope that your internet will be kind with us tonight, and maybe, I don't know, something magical happens. And now I'm here to invite Trina to give a short intro. Thank you, first of all, for accepting the invitation. We're really happy to have you. If you could share a little bit about yourself to the audience. You're muted. Trina, I guess you have to unmute yourself.
I do. Okay, yes. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Trina, pronoun she, her, and I call myself a UX engineer, which for me is a combination of my experience in web design development from a long time ago. And also I currently do both research and design. So with research, design, and development experience, UX engineer. I started out, as I said, as a web designer, developer about 20 years ago. And you mentioned earlier how things have changed and conversation was all about tools. Yeah, it was tools and then usability, then accessibility, and now we've evolved. So I work for a small consulting firm and mostly work on enterprise applications. So the applications that are on a company's intranet. So whether it's their internal job vacancies or training, that type of applications and websites. And I'm also on Instagram and as UX dot for the win. And really, I've got to admit, when I started it, I was like, I'm just going to focus on the surface of UX design. So all of the principles and things like that, because that's what other people were talking about. And eventually I was like, I think I need to focus on where my passion is, which is inclusive design. So that's where the majority of my content is focused on right now, and my blog.
And I want to thank you too for doing this in the UX world, because I think that indeed most accounts, and I'm guilty of that as well, go over very general topics, or like they don't go in depth with one particular theme, or like, let's say, mission of the UX industry. And I'm glad to see that there are articulate voices such as yours in the UX industry that are advocating and unpacking inclusive design to make it like more inclusive for everyone in a way. So with this, on this note, I would like to go to our first question so we make the most out of this meeting, and start by, first of all, let's define inclusive design. What is UX design, and how can we like unpack it? How can we translate it in a way that everybody understands what it's all about when we discuss inclusive design? So Gemma, if you want to go first, I will mute myself, and over to you.
Hopefully my internet's a little bit better, but I'll talk a bit slower. So inclusive design for me especially is mainly a process. So this is something that sometimes gets a bit lost, that inclusive design is a process in itself. And this could be for a product, a service, or even an environment, and possible. And that's the most important term, as many people as possible, adaptations. So everything we design has a potential of impact to people. So that could be positive, and it could also be negative. I know we kind of concentrate more on the positive side, but we really need to be focusing more on the negative side and how we impact people. And how we can make that experience a little bit better for the people.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that we will be going deeper into how to actually make design inclusive or more inclusive later in this conversation. I want to ask Trina to give her definition of inclusive design and how she would deconstruct this concept for the audience.
Yeah, so I agree with Gemma, but I see it building on that. I see it as both a process and an experience that the users have. So I would define inclusive design as a methodology or a framework for building applications, experiences where the diverse range of people who are going to use that product or service, that they feel respected, they feel that the design was made with them in mind. So whether it's accessibility or it's representation, your identity, however you are impacted in using that product, you feel like they must have talked to people like me. And so involving people, a range of people who are going to use that product, involving them in the design process, and ensuring that their needs and expectations are met. I think hopefully that wasn't too wordy. Yeah.
No, but I love this angle. I love the idea of inclusive design being something that makes the human that uses that product feel like it was designed for them. This is really nice, and I'm actually gonna steal it. So moving on into the second question for tonight. For me, like in the earlier days, and maybe even up to this day, I kind of have a confusion around all the terminology that's out there. So my question is, how do the terms inclusive design, accessibility, and ethical design relate? Or like, first of all, let's go over, is inclusive design the same as accessibility, or are they parts of one another? How does that relationship work? And then maybe moving into what ethical design is, if it's the same thing as being inclusive. And I will start with Trina this time, so we alternate and not and be yeah, and like switch.
So, yeah, I would say that inclusive design includes includes all of that. So both, or not both, because there's more than two, accessibility of it, representation, ethics. I mean, anything that shows that you respected the human respected their privacy, respected their ability, respected their identity. All aspects of them would all fall under inclusive design.
Okay, so just for me to make sure that, because this is my understanding today, and I want to make sure that it's correct, accessibility is simply like an application of inclusive design. It's a part, it's a small part of inclusive design. Gemma, what's your take on this?
What Trina was saying, accessibility is one aspect of inclusive design. Is slightly different, but it kind of interacts with accessibility and inclusive design. So it's important to understand the differences between them. So ethical design is about building a product or even a company around certain values or beliefs, and then that transitions into the product itself. Inclusive design is to bring all users on board, no matter their ability, backgrounds, race, gender. And then accessibility is more about how you implement that into the product itself, or it's about how you implement color contrast. Is your language inclusive? How do you capture data around people? Do you include different genders and things like that? So they all link together, but they're all their little separate entities that come together as a whole, which then starts to literally build products around people, not users, people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also a big fan of this distinction lately, because I think that we're so accustomed to calling people users because it's like in the definition of our job, like we're user experience designers. And I think that it got to the point that it's so deep in our DNA to call ourselves that sometimes we forget that we're not designing for users, we're actually designing for people. And yeah, I think the human aspect is something that should be replacing, even on a language level, that technical name of a person who's using an interface. So, and this really is a very good segue into my next question, which is, since you both pointed out that inclusive design is also a process, or is essentially a process, how can we as designers use that process, incorporate inclusivity in our design process, to create products that are more accessible and more inclusive? So what can we do in our day-to-day work to be more inclusive? Gemma, what are your thoughts on that?
So for me, when you're first starting getting into inclusive, overwhelming, a lot of the documentation online, it's a lot to take in.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you can bring it all the way back to what you need to do, first of all, is to put yourself in the shoes of someone else and experience something through their eyes. So that would be the first thing that you should do. And then after that, then you should start figuring out what's the worst case scenario that you're designing, and who is this going to affect? For instance, see, as taking on board a different user and then translating your colors around those type of people. As after you look at those type of things, ask yourself another question, which is, who might you be excluding? Mm-hmm. So again, this goes back to the whole more than just the generic user, and do you take into account other users or other people? So when we talk about genders and things like that, how do you capture people's genders? Is it just male or female? If it is, you're kind of exclude, just looking past the normal, just key things that we usually do, and look out.
Thanks a lot, Gemma. I really love the question, who might you be excluding? And I think that that's also like something that has to do with our own internal biases, but also cultural biases. And it's something that's even hidden from ourselves. So I think that it's really important that we consciously go against this, how can I call it, the tendency or inclination or bias is like the best word, and try to uncover it, and not let it like creep in our design without us knowing. I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still here. Just my phone rang. I didn't know that that interrupts everything. Sorry. Trina, what are your thoughts on it? How can we incorporate inclusive the approach towards inclusivity in our design process and in our everyday work?
Yeah, the who might we be excluding is fundamental, right? And as you mentioned, our own biases can easily just deter us from recognizing that the people who are using the product, they're not all just like us, right? So even if it's a product for like a beauty product, and you're like, oh, you assume it's just going to be for women. Not necessarily. And all women aren't the same. There's different skin tones, different everything. I mean, just everything. Height, weight, size, etc. So definitely looking or considering, who am I? What are my what would be my experience with this product? And then step away and consider, well, what are all the other types of experiences and other types of people who might be using this product? And there are a lot of resources online to address or principles for in each of those buckets that we talked about. Accessibility, get to know them, go look them up, whether it's figuring out how to make images accessible or text accessible or videos accessible. There's tools out there, or tools. Well, there are tools too, right? But I wanted to say that there are guidelines and principles for how to address those types of things. Usability, which is our cognition, right? There, obviously, was the biggest push, the most ubiquitous or most common area that's talked about. There's guidelines out there for that. I think that representation and equitable design, since that's a little newer, I have yet to find any really good guidelines, detailed guidelines for how to make sure that you address that area. If you know specifically what you're looking for, oh, I want to look at how to address different gender identities in a form, you'd have to know to type in gender identities inclusion in a form. So I'm hoping that there will be more that comes out in that area. But yes, the questioning your own biases and who might you be excluding, who may be alienated, offended, considering that is fundamental. Being curious of how you can address those differences.
It's gonna become, I think, the amount of care and empathy and attention that we need to put into the design process, it's gonna grow. But I mean this is like the definition, if you want, the essence of our job, to be present for our users, for the people that use our products. I'm trying to help myself or stop saying users.
Get up it.
Yeah, I know. It's like it's imprinted. It's like rooted in my mind, and it's really hard to fight. But yeah, I mean, I think I got a lot of questions from Instagram for today's event around designing for gender inclusivity. Could we go a little into this topic and maybe explain what are some things that we might be doing as designers to build products that are more inclusive from the gender perspective, which seems like a very prominent problem in the industry right now. So, Trina, if you want to go first on this one, what can we do as designers to not be to discriminate on gender?
My answer is going to be really simple and short. I think that, and just my personality, I tend to, it's not called counter, but do the opposite of what convention is. I think that's what it is. So if I need to do imagery of, I don't know, doctors or a carpenter or a mechanic, I will intentionally not choose men, right? Just because I just want to make a point. You call that design activism. So I would say, again, you got to address or think about where we are today. So what are the stereotypes, status quo, and in that way, as far as genders, and I would just kind of buck the system on them. I will look for what I don't normally see and try to, that's for images, right? And put them out there. But then, yeah, I think that applies to a lot, even for language and copy. Still, just don't make assumptions. Don't put people in a box. Yeah.
I really love the point about going counter or contra your immediate impulse, because I think that the immediate impulse or assumption comes from all the societal bias and from all the cultural discrimination that many times we're not even aware of. So we should not trust our instincts that much when we're designing. And this also goes back or ties closely to this like mantra of UX designers: you are not the user, and your assumptions are probably not true. So going against what you feel like is the right thing to do, or the normal thing to do, that normal is no longer normal, or you should challenge everything, at least challenge everything that you feel like doing, because that probably comes from a cultural programming or something that's not that's like it's a bias or a discrimination that's embedded in society, and the only way to get rid of it is to challenge it persistently. Gemma, what would you say, how can we build products that are better, that are more inclusive on gender?
So again, it goes back to what I said just previously about who might we be excluding. So again, just as Trina said, different images that represent different people. And it is really difficult doing this, mainly because society has ingrained certain things into us to say, this is male, this is.
Yeah.
So it's just trying to do, which I normally see, I work on forms a lot, is how you capture gender. My first question to always working on this is, why do you need to capture gender? Is it a relevant thing to be capturing? And if it is relevant, then okay, that's my biggest pet peeve ever. And you will come up against that it's very hard to data map. So that's the only reason we have 3 options, which is male, female, and other. But my answer back to that is, that's not data that you can actually use. Person or the user to input whichever gender they want to input. So give the ownership to them and empower those people to give you the right data that you may want to capture in a not so much an other fields, just give them the ability to input a field and then in the back end week later.
I really love that. So I generally love the idea or the concept or the method of empowering the end human. I think that's like the best way, that the best thing, that without overwhelming him. So I think that this is like the finding the right balance between option paralysis, like giving him 100 options for gender and letting him like go through all of them and see if he finds the one that he most identifies with, but so without creating this overload, this cognitive overload, giving him the power. And this goes, I think, for many situations, not just on the gender field. It can be anything where you let the product adapt to the user. And I think this is extremely powerful. And my next question is still on like a very specific use case of inclusive design. How can we design for not discriminating people with disabilities? Do you have any advice around that, Gemma?
Yeah, educate yourself around disabilities and look at what disability actually means. So there's a lot of different ways that somebody could have a disabled advantage or disadvantage at something. So I'll just give you some stats. So 80% of disabled individuals is actually invisible. So it's quite hard to look at somebody and say they definitely have a disability when in reality they may not. 1 in 25 people are visually impaired. I fall into this category. I wear glasses. 1 in 12 men are colorblind. So it goes back to checking color contrast and things like that, especially if the majority of your user base are male, vision impaired, and different versions of colorblindness and things like that. 1 in 10 is really big in the creative community. I fall into this category myself. So, and then about 1 in 11 people are actually over the age of 65. So making sure that people who are in the older generations can use your product as good as the people who are in the younger generation.
Thank you so much. Yes, this also. I think that my comment on this is that most principles that go for like one category or one theme are you can like generally apply them or learn something from them. Trina, what are your thoughts around designing for including people with disabilities in your products?
Yeah, I agree also with Gemma about just not making assumptions. You know, not only are there invisible disabilities, like each of us, if we are so fortunate to grow older in age, we're going to end up having some type of disability, even if it's just vision, right? But then there could be motor disabilities. There's all types of things that happen over the course of age. But then even today, any given day, you can have a situational disability or a temporary disability. I've given examples of you're in a public space and you need to, or you're trying to watch a video. That could be a disability if you can't hear what's the content, the words or the audio in that video. Having the captions there will allow you to still experience that content. So thinking about the fact that, and it's called interest convergence. Oh my gosh, can't say the word. Where a lot of times people don't think about addressing something unless it benefits them. So if you're one of those people that falls in that category, then go ahead and apply it to yourself. At any given time, you could break your arm, can't use maybe your right arm, can't use your mouse. You're going to have to get through that application, keyboard only, left hand. Just go ahead and consider at any given moment, I may have some type of disability, whether it's mobile, auditory, visual, and address it for yourself or for you or for a friend who may encounter that. Really, you're supposed to just care about people, but yeah, if that's what you need to motivate you, then go for it. And at any moment, absolutely, any of us can have some type of disability in any of those categories.
Definitely. And I think that this reminds me of something that we do in our boot camp, where we have this special chapter around where we have several chapters about inclusive, ethical, and just good design in general. But one of them is more focused on building empathy for your users and being inclusive when you're having an inclusive mindset from the very beginning. And what we do is that we ask our students to imagine using a product having a disability, which is obviously not even close to the real experience that a person, let's say, with a visual impairment might have, but still it's immensely powerful in helping them like understand the amount of effort and the pain and the frustration that a user has to go through to use an app on our iPhones, and so on our phones. So it's like it's incredibly, so just doing the exercise, just even as designers, you don't have to do it in a UX bootcamp, just do it like on the next product you work on, like mandatory, but you can do it like every day just to remind yourself that there's so much that you're missing when you're thinking about a solution. Like the first thing that comes to your mind is probably the happy path, is probably like the optimal scenario of using that product by your persona, who somebody is asking a really nice question about personas that I also had in mind. And actually, I'm gonna just ask this question because I mentioned it, and we will have a live Q&A. So if you have any questions, pop them in the chat, and we will spend the last 15 minutes discussing your questions. But I will ask this question now from Elizabeth because it's something that has also been on my mind. How would you make personas for a specific brand, keeping in mind inclusive design? And generally, what I wanted to ask, and it's like pretty much the same question, but with a different flavor. If you have like the persona from your interviews and you have your target audience and you design for that persona or that set of personas, like a couple of people that are the archetype of your larger audiences, let's say, how can you then like go in the details for each and every person who's being left out? So I think that there's immense complexity and so many possibilities of things that need to be tackled. How can you make sure that you're doing that? I mean, even when you have the best intentions, I think it's really hard to cover all the possible types of visual impairment or hearing. Like, how do you actually do that? And yeah, and getting back to the question, how would you make personas for inclusive design? Trina, if you want to start this time, I don't know if that was the.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have actually stopped using personas, and that's part of the reason you can't address. I'm not saying that everybody needs to stop, but I have. You can't address everything. But if I were to continue create or had continued creating them, I think having a person, one of those personas, which you should only have but like 4 or so, just making sure that one or two of them have in that write-up some disability, which then allows you to bring that up in any of the conversations whenever you're working on a design. Like, right, this one, we only wrote that the person has dyslexia or whatever you chose to put in there, but it at least allows you to have a persona to point to and say, we need to address others, but I guess, yeah, I'm pointing. You have a persona to point to that has a particular disability and keeps that conversation going.
I love the idea. I actually never considered it when building personas. I always thought of the general spectrum, like the broadest spectrum of usually healthy people in my products, and I think that that's like perfectly a perfectly good example of like considering someone from the beginning, and that forces you into thinking of other scenarios that might be different ways of using your product than the one that is the most obvious or like doesn't require any inclusive thinking in it. Gemma, what are your thoughts around personas and balancing personas with all the use cases of not being inclusive?
Yeah. So for me, I think sometimes personas, if you only have a certain amount, they can actually constrain you and box you in. So personas are good if you just wanted a general idea to look at focus groups and introduce people to test with your solutions with people with different abilities. Like Trina was saying before about using your keyboard to navigate a website. I'm able-bodied. You can see I have 2 hands, but every time that I design a product or if I'm testing it with my development team, the first thing I will always do is take away my mouse and navigate the whole experience with just my keyboard, because I'm taking into account other people who are not like me. And that's pretty much all you really need to do. So try not to box yourself in with all these different personas and think you have to design for every single one of these. It's not. It's about flipping your mindset and actually thinking about, if you start designing for inclusive and accessibility, everyone else will benefit. So instead of doing everything for the one user, the perfect scenario, flip it and do it for the worst case scenario instead, because everyone else then will have a more detailed experience.
That's also an interesting way to look at it, and I think that it's also, for me, if I go more abstract on what you just said, I think that once you do good, more good is done. I don't know how to, if this makes sense, but if you do good, then it will like grow and be more than it seems to be. With that question, do you think there are products that do well with inclusivity, that are like some good examples, or some products that we can like, or apps, or anything, can be anything, that are doing a great job at being inclusive, and that we should like set as an example or a standard, or just some good examples of products or companies that do well with inclusivity. And then we'll also go into the into the shaming part, where we can talk about products that are not that good with being inclusive. So Gemma, is there any product or good example that comes to your mind? Or it can be just like a feature or a use case, or not, anything that comes to your mind.
Yeah, so for me, especially living in the UK, we have the National Health Service, which is the NHS. They have a lot of principles and examples of how to address people of all different lists, and it's free to go and view. So I always go and look at that. It's the same with the UK government. They are pretty good with inclusive design and accessibility, and their website is one of the best websites to navigate, considering all the information it contains. So looking at sites like that are the best place to start, especially if you're new to inclusive design. And another place that I would always recommend as well is Microsoft, because Microsoft actually introduced inclusive design and introduce the whole around it, and the documentation is really easy to follow, and they explain it all in such a simple way. So just pop onto their website and it'll take you an hour to get through it end to end, and it'll change your mindset on the whole thing.
That's great. I actually didn't think about Microsoft that way. I mean, they've been around for so long, and I think they're like the first product that was out there. So I never think of them in this very flattering light. But yeah, I think they're a good example. Trina, do any examples come to your mind?
Yeah, I +1 Microsoft. They definitely have an extensive repository. I've also stumbled on resources from Adobe. They also have a blog and provide a lot of resources and information about accessible, inclusive design. And then I'm also going to shift a little bit. So a particular product that I personally feel, or the products that they put out is Fenty. Is Rihanna's, both her Fenty Beauty and Savage Fenty. Yeah, I don't know. I recently watched also her Savage Fenty, so that's lingerie and loungewear. Watched the fashion show on, what was it, Amazon Prime, anyway, but just her values, you can tell in her business that she wants to make sure that she includes people of different races and skin color, LGBTQ, that whole spectrum. She has models that are that have amputations, just the whole 9 yards. So as far as having that feeling of inclusion and experience of inclusion, I think she's hitting that nail on the head. Another would be Ben and Jerry's. They've been very vocal in their values, and whether it's certain ice cream lines or what ice cream limited editions, that's what I think it is, ice cream flavors, where they're speaking to actually usually they are supporting some other organization. So like I think there was Hubby Hubby instead of, was it Hubby Hubby? Yes, it was. Instead of Chubby Hubby, things like that. They are showing that they care about the diverse range of people that their products serve. And so I give both them a thumbs up as well.
That's nice to know. And also, I'm a big fan of ice cream. So now I have an extra reason to like ice cream.
There you go.
Cool. And on the other side of the spectrum, do you have any products that are doing a very bad job at being inclusive, or that are overtly exclusive or discriminating in their design? Something that it's like the obvious don't be like that. Trina, do any bad examples come to your mind?
They don't, I mean, not to say they don't exist, but here's something very telling of culture. I think I am so used to exclusion that I don't know, and creating workarounds or just ignoring things. I think that I notice inclusion more than I notice exclusion. I feel like because that is the norm. Yeah, sad to say. So I don't have any
No, that's,
any any in particular to name. Gemma might name something up. I'd be like, oh yes, yes. But yeah, offhand, I think I'm just so used to exclusion.
yeah, it's like that red car metaphor, when you want to buy a red car and then you start seeing red cars everywhere in the city. It's like similar when you're looking for good in the world, you start seeing good in the world. So yeah, the world is our mirror. I guess so. I guess, and I also want to say that probably there's like no product that does things perfectly from an inclusive perspective, and consequently adversely, there's no product that does things poorly or awful on all things inclusive. So probably there are nuances or aspects or different features that are not as inclusive as they should be, but it's not like, I don't think there's one product out there that can be completely shamed. But Gemma, do you have anyone you want to mention?
I think I'm the same. It's see it sometimes, but many companies are actually obvious with things like this because obviously they don't want to be called out. But there are definite some things that I sometimes may come across when I'm just browsing the web. I can't really say anything off the top of my head. But I think the one thing that does dribble, and I can definitely see that none of those products or things that I can see out there would actually be people or would be user friendly or would just be usable in general. And I think it's about picking the places where you find inspiration and looking beyond dribble and things like that, and start really looking into companies and see if you can see if they're being inclusive, and then there's an inspiration from them.
I love that, going outside of Dribble to look for to understanding inclusive design. And on this final note of going outside of Dribble, what are some places for inspiration or other resources that come to your mind when it comes to inclusive design, where people should go, and maybe if there's like any extension that can help them with accessibility or anything along those lines? I know that I recommended A11 project for accessibility. I think it's a great place to visit. It's in the chat. But if you want to recommend people to check out other resources apart from Microsoft Adobe and what has been mentioned, if there's anything else, Gemma, do you have any recommendations?
So I was actually, they have a lot out there, and they kind of pack it all in. So they give you a lot of exam tools and things like that. So I highly recommend that. Again, I'll go back to the UK government. So every single component that they've designed for their websites has all been tested and verified inspiration from, and the same from the National Health Service, the UK. Again, they've gone through vigorous testing in the box, so you'll know where to go.
Just one thing, I didn't get the first one. So it's the government of UK and also the national service, but what was the first one?
So I said the same thing about the A11 project.
Okay. Okay, got it. Thank you so much. I am popping the links in the chat. Trina, is there any places with resources you want to recommend people to visit?
Oh, for accessibility, whether you can go to WCAG, but maybe web, because there's a plethora there. WCAG.org, I believe it is. WebAIM, they also have speak a lot about accessibility. I mean, that's their focus. Yeah, I think that would, and then Kat Holmes, who wrote the book Mismatch, she also has resources on her site. And I think it's mismatch.design. That would be another.
I will look for it and try to, maybe if my colleagues can help me find this one, mismatch.design. Okay, yep, I captured them all in the chat, so everybody who wants to visit and save these links can find them over there. And now I think we have a couple of minutes left, so I will start taking the questions that came in the chat. We have a question from Chandriana. When attempting to have user interviews, how do you persuade a client to be more inclusive in their options? What do you do if that can't be done? And I also want to add on that, if generally stakeholders are not open to inclusive design, how do you persuade and advocate that?
Yeah, so for me, first of all, it just starts off with simple education and just explaining what inclusive design is. Explain to them is not as difficult as you may perceive. It's the one that always wins for me, because you'll have more users who are able to use your product. So instead of just relying on the one user, which we normally call the average user, we are catering for more people. So more people that's using your product, the more money you're going to make in the long run, which usually works when you're talking to high stakeholders, if you mention money.
Trina, do you have anything to add to that?
I missed the question because I got a weird pop-up about a focus mode. Okay.
Yeah, it's just like our master of Zoom is arranging the way people see us so they can see us in focus, and so it's just a Zoom feature that that we're using. Okay.
I was reading that message thinking, what is that? And I didn't hear the question.
So the question is, the question came in the chat, and it's this one. When attempting to have user interviews, how do you persuade the client to be more inclusive in their options, and what do you do if that can be done?
So I don't know if they're referring to client like doing freelance work, and then you have to convince them that time needs to be taken to it to identify participants or users to meet with. But since I'm not doing freelance and I am building applications that are for the employees in our organization, it's not as big of a challenge. Like I have much easier access to the people who are going to use the product because it's in this organization, whether it's a federal agency or something. I usually have that access, thankfully, to be able to get a broad spectrum of users who will be using that product.
Yeah, but just to, I can also share my thoughts around it. I've had many times where I think I can relate this to persuading clients and stakeholders on the value of research in general. I think that I've been in companies I've had clients who didn't necessarily understand why we should invest in research, and especially when you bring up even inclusive design, it feels like the last thing on their priorities list. It's like totally not worth the time. Let's just ship it and launch it and make money faster, right? Yeah, but I think that it's something that you mentioned also. If you are able to like prove the value, at least with like a small project or a small thing where you involve people, or just showing them how the product will be used by someone who has a disability that they don't want to invest in, just doing something quickly that proves your point. And I know that many times just bringing the stakeholder at the table with the user and seeing the user using the product and having a hard time will change their mind like magic. It happened to me sometimes, just helping them see the user struggling. Maybe that's one thing that you could try doing, but I know it's a difficult battle to have, and I've had it and probably will have it again and again. Okay, I'm gonna move on to the last question because we have like 3 minutes left, and I think it's, where is it? Where is it? Um, there was a question from Shik Chihak. I hope I said the name right. What exactly is the difference between accessibility and inclusivity in terms of design? I think we touched upon that a little. So we said that accessibility is like an application of inclusive design. It's a part of inclusive design, and it's the way by which you don't discriminate the people who can use your product, that might have disabilities, visual impairments, and so on. And the last question came, I think, I don't know, I see here host, probably, is it from Radu? I don't know. Is gender inclusive language advised for all clients, products, audiences? This is an interesting question, I think. Should it be like the norm, or is it like specific to the industries? What do you think, Trina? What I see you nodding that yes, it should be the norm.
I was like, yeah, that's an interesting question. I would think it's for all industries. I mean, because not just creating forms where the input or the data you're gathering from them, making it inclusive, but your language. There's copy throughout an application or website where you may alienate different gender identities by aligning to stereotypes about genders, right? Assuming, yeah, I would say it applies to all products, audiences, clients.
It's a question from Fernanda. So Fernanda, if you're here and you asked a question live, this is the answer is yes, all products should. Or Gemma, do you have another take on it, or do you align with decisive yes?
Yep, I agree. Is it inclusive for everyone? So it goes back to what we were saying in the beginning about changing your mindset and changing the stereotypical things that society has made us believe, that something is male, something is female. We can break those norms if we are all inclusive, and we're starting to see it a lot more now within all different industries. Instagram gets introduced, adding in your pronouns and things like that. It's well equipped to add in your pronouns, even identify anything different. So personally, I still identify female, and she around me feel like they're able to put their pronouns in as well, because then it becomes normalized. So the more inclusive you can be, the more normalized it will be, and then we should hopefully start to see a shift in society and help be inclusive for everyone.
I just thought of another example. Just genderization, I think is a word, of products. So if you're building something or you're creating something that's supposed to be speaking to feminine people, to assume that pink is supposed to represent females and blue is supposed to represent males, you know? So even that type of example, you're making assumptions about people that could be alienating.
Yeah, I think this is an example that hits home, because I have a small baby daughter, and everybody's buying her pink stuff, and it gets on my nerves so bad. And I have to tell everyone, please stop buying pink clothes. I don't want to program her.
Her favorite color is green. Like what? Right.
Yes. What's wrong with green? No, but pink is so cute. Okay, stop with the I can deeply, I fight with that every day on a personal level as well. So thank you so much, Gemma. Thank you, Trina. Thank you for accepting this invitation and for spending this hour with us. I think we unpacked a lot of value here, and I hope it was valuable for the audience. Thank you very much to everyone who joined. If you want to recommend this recording to anybody, it will be posted on YouTube on Mento Design Academy. If you want to stay in touch and follow Gemma and Trina's work, I will just now share their Instagram pages in the chat. And also because we also want to encourage connecting with one another, and not just being like a conversation where we meet and never see each other again. Anybody who wants to connect, leave your LinkedIn in the chat, and then we will leave this chat, this room, 5 more minutes open, and so we can add each other on LinkedIn and stay connected. So yeah, once again, thank you all for joining. If there are any last words, Gemma or Trina, that you want to say, please do so. I am looking for your links.
Well, this is great. A lot of good questions came up too in the chat. I'm scrolling back through the chat to see some of the other questions. I
hope I didn't miss too many questions. I felt like at some point there was no question coming in, and then 20 messages, and I just can't make a. But anybody who has a question unanswered can definitely reach out to Gemma or to Trina or to both of them, and try to get their question answered, because it's important. It's an important topic. And thanks again to everyone who joined. I will mute and stop the video, but this room remains open so we can connect in the chat on LinkedIn. Everybody have a great day or evening or rest of the week. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining.